Hello, I'm Nick Park from Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and this is our weekly message. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. Last week we were talking about the Olympic opening ceremony. We were talking about sin and paganism and blasphemy, trying to bring a more measured approach to it. Thank you for everybody that got in touch. So many people had encouragement and kind comments about that message. And we were asked if we could do more of this, not every time, not every Friday, but if sometimes, maybe as an occasional series, we could deal with some of these very controversial issues where people are immediately reacting with a knee-jerk reaction, and maybe look at it and bring a more biblical and a measured approach after soaking it in prayer. So we're calling this occasional series Knee Reactions. Not knee-jerk reactions, because we don't want to sound like jerks. So a knee reaction means our initial reaction is to pray and hear God and reflect on what the Bible says, and then try to bring a truly biblical perspective. We're doing that today on the subject of boxing and gender, because there's obviously been a huge controversy at the Olympic Games over that. And so what I'm sharing with you now is based on prayer and reflection and scripture, rather than just my knee-jerk reaction to what happened. Some fundamental realities. God has created us male and female. There's only two genders, and we're either male or female, and that's part of our God-given identity. It's not based on how we feel. It's based on science. It's based on fact. Also, gender and sex are the same thing. There is a move afoot to bring Humpty Dumpty philosophy, where Humpty Dumpty said, "Words mean what I want them to mean." There's an Alice Through the Looking Glass at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Humpty Dumpty said, "Words mean what I want them to mean, nothing more and nothing less." But that's not true. Words have distinct meanings that other people understand from what you say. And so gender and sex are in fact the same thing. In fact, for many years, gender didn't apply to human biology at all. It was simply a linguistic term. It was actually used in respect to words and languages where, like in French, you have feminine words and you have masculine words. In Germany, you have feminine, masculine, and neuter words. But people began using gender for human biology because they didn't want to use the word sex, because that wasn't considered polite or proper, and they were a bit prudish to use it. So they began using gender as a more polite way of saying what sex you are. But I believe, and I believe this is a Christian standpoint, that gender and sex are the same thing. You are male or female, and you're born that way. That's you, made in the image of God. Now, sport, let's be clear, is not the be-all and end-all. Sport is fun. I like to watch it. I admire those who can do well in sport. I think it's great when Christians participate in sport and make a good testimony to their faith. But sport is not the most important thing in the world. But sport and faith are actually the two major interfaces in our world today, where this subjective approach, where you are what you feel and there's no such thing as absolute truth, where that clashes with objective reality. Because in Christian faith we say, God is good. The Bible is true. These are objective realities. There is darkness, there is light, there is truth, there is falsehood. Doesn't just depend on how you feel. And in sport as well, because sporting success is not based on how you feel. It's based on how fast you are. It's based on how hard or often you can punch. It's based on how high or how long you can jump. It's based on how many times you can put the ball in the back of the net. These are objective realities. And I feel like I'm a woman, into something that is based on objective realities, of course you're going to have a culture clash, because the two don't go together. Now, my basic assumptions when it comes to sport is, first of all, I want to say straight off, I believe that transgender participation in sport, particularly men participating in women's events, biological men, is a nonsense. It's also potentially dangerous as well as unfair. And so my own proposal, and I've suggested this and explained this in length elsewhere, is that sport should actually have the two categories. We should call the male category an open category. That's open to everybody, irrespective of what you feel you are. And then there's an XX category for those who have XX chromosomes. what we used to refer to as women before people started messing up and trying to define that differently. And so if you had an open category and an XX category, it would do away with this nonsense with people who are biological males, have male chromosomes, live life as a male, and then decide they want to transition to being a female and participate in female sport. Now, today also, by the way, I'm going to be talking about a boxer where there is genuine confusion about whether they are male and female. Now, I'm going to refer to them as they rather than he or she. This is not political correctness, nor is it bad grammar. It's actually very good grammar because it's not really clear at this point what their actual gender is. And, you know, in that case, it's perfectly good English to use they instead. So if I said to somebody, I got an anonymous letter, they don't know if it's a man or a woman who sent the letter. So they say, well, what did they write in it? They're not saying there's more than one person. They're only saying there's one writer of the letter. But because they don't know if they're male or female, they say they. And the same if you don't want to actually reveal somebody's gender. You just say, you know what, I was talking with somebody and they said this to me. You don't actually want to tell somebody whether it's a man or a woman that said it to you. So it's perfectly correct to use they and them and their in the English language when you're referring to somebody, one person in the singular, who you don't know their gender or you don't really want to make an issue of their gender or specify it. So I'm going to be using those pronouns for that reason. Now, the situation is that two boxers, Imani Khalif and Lin Yuqing, competing in the women's Olympic boxing events, had reportedly failed a gender test last year, testing as XY, that would be male chromosomes rather than XX, female chromosomes. Reportedly, I say reportedly because no evidence has actually been produced. All there was a tweet by the head of the International Boxing Association. Now that is problematic because the IBA have been rejected by the International Olympic Committee as a covering organisation for boxing due to some pretty shocking allegations of corruption and bad governance. And even this issue with these tests, it happened. The head of the IBA is a mate of Vladimir Putin's, who likes making shocking and controversial statements. And Imani Khalif had just beaten a hot favourite Russian boxer who had previously been undefeated. So it was pretty murky. And they produced no evidence of these gender tests. There was simply a tweet released. And tweets say all kinds of things, and a lot of it's false on X, as it's now called. And the IBA say, well, we can't show the tests because they're confidential. What if they're confidential? What are you tweeting about them for? But we don't know if these tests really were carried out and if they really had these results. But there is a doubt there. Now, the International Olympic Committee took over the administration of boxing because the IBA wasn't fit to do so, just for these present Olympics in 2024. In fact, the IOC have said that boxing needs to get its house in order and get a proper governing body. Otherwise, there may well be no boxing in the next Olympics in 2028. The IOC don't want to continue administrating it. Now, these two boxers, Imani Khalif and Li Yuqing, they were born as women, born as girls. They lived as girls and women all their lives, have boxed all their careers as women, including in the last Olympics and in World Championships, and their passports say they are women. Now, Imani Khalif became the focal point of the controversy when she won a fight inside a minute. Her Italian opponent was hit on the nose, said she was hit harder than she's ever been hit before. She retired hurt, she was in floods of tears, and there was photographs that went viral of this poor girl being beaten up by a biological male. Now, many people automatically assumed it was to do with the transgender issue. They just saw the photograph, saw the words biological male, and said, oh, this is one of these transgender issues. And so we've seen, and I'm talking now about Christians. We've seen Christians posting on social media. I've seen many Christians posting, this man failed at men's sports, so he turned to women's sports and beat up this woman. I've seen people saying the Italian girl was nearly killed. I've seen people calling Imani Khalif repulsive. I've even saw somebody say, well, put them in a ring with Mike Tyson and let him beat them up. See how they like that? And I even saw one pastor who posted, "I'd like to get in the ring with this man and give him a good punching. How would he like that?" To which one of his church members said, "I'm so grateful my pastor has the courage to speak out about this." Now, let's get the jerk element out of these knee-jerk reactions. This is nothing to do with transgender issue. You know, there's no issue in, there's no transgender people who are biologically male and couldn't succeed in male sport and decided to transition to being a woman. There's nobody in that condition competing in these Olympic Games in the boxing. So this is nothing to do with transgender or anything. Imani Khalif has never participated in men's sports. They couldn't have failed in men's sports because they grew up as a girl. Born with female private parts, always raised as a girl, lived as a girl, competed as a girl. Looks quite masculine in their features, but that doesn't actually mean you're a man. So they've never participated in men's sports. The Italian boxer was not nearly killed. She was punched harder than she's ever been punched before. And that will happen to every boxer. Every boxer at some stage of their career, particularly if you're an elite event like the Olympic Games, you will get hit harder than you've ever been hit before. I remember being hit harder than I've ever been hit before. I was making a nuisance of myself outside a pub, and I picked a fight, and I got punched, and I've never been hit so hard before. Now, I thoroughly deserved it. I was annoying so many people. I was actually annoying myself. If somebody else hadn't hit me, I probably would have ended up hitting myself. But somebody hit me and it was harder than I've ever been hit before. And I can remember to this day sitting in the hospital afterwards while the doctors put some stitches into my face saying, "I've never been hit as hard as that before." But she wasn't nearly killed. Now, if Imani Khalif really is biologically male, and I'm saying if because we don't actually know, then how does that make them repulsive? If somebody is born a girl, raised as a girl, thinks they've always been a girl, and then suddenly a test comes that says, "Hey, you're a man," how does that make them repulsive? It means they have a deformity or an abnormality. So are we as Christians going to start calling people repulsive because they have an abnormality? Are we going to call blind people repulsive because they can't see? If a child has a cleft palate, are we going to say that they are repulsive? So if somebody has an abnormality or a disorder through no fault of their own, that does not make them repulsive. It makes them somebody who's deserving of our sympathy, and we want clarity about what their gender actually is. How does bringing Mike Tyson into the discussion advance the cause of protecting women? Particularly given that Mike Tyson admitted in his biography that he punched his ex-wife. He actually said the best punch he ever threw was the one he hit his ex-wife with. So you're purporting to protect women from violence by men, and in so doing you suggest that Mike Tyson gets into the ring with somebody who was born with, certainly to all intents and purposes, a girl. Now we have doubts about the actual chromosome tests. But, that makes no sense whatsoever, bringing Mike Tyson into the discussion. And identifying somebody that may have a previously undiagnosed condition, and a very humiliating medical condition, and then bullying them online is not the mark of a courageous pastor. Neither is saying that you would like to punch them. That's not actually how Christian leaders are supposed to behave, and it doesn't make you a courageous pastor. Quite the opposite, if anything. So, it brings us to this. What do we mean by biologically male? You see, sometimes as Christians, we've actually painted ourselves into a corner here. I've seen Christians, for example, ridicule online the idea that sex is determined by anything other than our external organs. But now all of a sudden we want to argue that somebody who has female external reproductive organs is actually biologically male. So you're actually contradicting yourself if you do that. There are Christians who have online mocked a Supreme Court judge in the United States because she was asked during a hearing with Congress to define a woman. And she answered by saying, "I'm not a biologist." And she received a lot of ridicule for that. But now when it comes to Imani Khalif, we seem to be equally unsure about how we define male and female. How do you define a girl or a woman? Is it by their private parts? Is it by their testosterone levels? Is it by their chromosomes? We need to make up our minds and stop contradicting ourselves, because we're actually making ourselves look foolish when we do that, and we're also making ourselves look mean. Now, does that mean I'm saying that what's happening in the Olympic boxing is okay? Absolutely not. I think the International Olympic Committee is completely out of order in saying, well, we'll go by what somebody's passport says. You know, you can put anything on a passport. So this is wrong, it's unfair, and it's dangerous, because if Imani Khalif is biologically male and fighting females, then somebody could get seriously hurt or even killed. But a knee-jerk reaction based on a photograph and based on a long-running culture war over gender has turned a complicated situation with serious human consequences into a freak show. And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for boxing and a tragedy for the church members that have contributed to it. So what should be done? Well, the International Olympic Committee needs to do genetic testing. I would say test for chromosomes. And I get people to compete either in an open competition that's open to everybody, or have the XX for biological women. And it wouldn't cost much to do, and it would be easy to do genetic testing, simple DNA test on every entrant into a women's sporting event and the Olympics. We do the tests for drugs and other things. We could test for that easily enough. Now, we also need to recognize that sport is inherently unfair. You know, some people have said, well, even if she's a woman, or even if they're a woman, and they've got elevated testosterone, they should still be banned because they're too strong. But sport isn't just for people who are not too strong. We have categories of sport by weight, we have categories of sport by age, we have categories of sport by disability level, and we have categories of sport by gender and biological sex. But just because somebody's too strong, if they're still a woman, they should still be able to compete. You know, even in men's sport, I mean, I remember the first time I saw Jonah Lomu playing rugby, and I thought, man, this guy's not human. I mean, he's the size of a forward, but he's got the speed of a back, and I imagine trying to tackle him. I used to play a bit of rugby at school, and I thought, somebody's going to get killed here. But we couldn't ban Jonah Lomu because he was too big or too fast. And in the same way, you can't ban somebody from boxing because they're too strong if they meet the categories of qualifying. Now, yeah, it does seem unfair, particularly when you look at the photograph of the two boxers together. But, you know, sport isn't fair. It's not fair that I can't ever compete in professional basketball and never would have been able to because I'm a shade under 6 feet tall and there's all these people that are 7 feet tall. That's not fair. It's not fair that Michael Phelps won multiple gold medals because he had several ways of producing chemicals in his body quite naturally that are quite freakish and very unusual. That's not fair to other swimmers, you might say, but you know what? It wasn't done by drugs. It was a naturally occurring condition. There's also a video going around. I don't know if you've seen the video of this Chinese girl playing basketball, and she's playing in underage basketball competitions, and she's 7'5". I mean, it's purely natural, but it doesn't seem fair. She's like twice the height of some of her competitors, and it just walks up and drops the ball into the ring without even jumping. It doesn't seem fair, but you can't ban somebody for being too tall or too strong if they meet the criteria to compete in a certain competition. Now, again, somebody said to me, well, you know what, she's not really female, not really male, they're intersex. Intersex doesn't mean that you aren't male or female. Once you start suggesting as a Christian that there's more than one sex, you're in a slippery slope there. And actually the principled stand we take on gender issues will fall apart if we start suggesting there's people who are neither male nor female and there's some kind of in-between thing. That's subjectivism as opposed to objective truth and reality. So somebody with a so-called intersex condition, they are male or female. We just have a bit of difficulty working out sometimes which they are. We need to remember that real people are at the heart of all of this, and they will be vulnerable. Can you imagine growing up as a girl, thinking you're a girl, competing as a girl, you're aware that sometimes people say, hey, you look like a boy. That would be quite hurtful. And then suddenly you're told you are male. That would be humiliating. It would be devastating. I could understand people even getting suicidal in that condition. And so we're talking vulnerable people involved here. And we need to check the facts before we post stuff online that we know nothing about. Otherwise, we're like the mob that I used to watch in the old Hammer horror films, the black and white horror films when I was a child. And you had the mob going from the village with pitchforks and torches going up to Castle Frankenstein. And they're mad and they're angry because they don't really understand what's going on. Well, that's what many Christians have looked like over this last week on this issue. We've looked like the mob with the pitchforks and the torches, and it's been a bad week for boxing, but it's been a worse week in some ways for the church. We need to check the facts. Don't post stuff that isn't true. You know, if we post stuff that isn't true on social media, we are spreading lies. And it's easy enough to check these things out. And if on trying to check it out, you realize, hang on, there's a bit of doubt about this, don't go posting up what somebody else posted, because just saying, oh no, I just copied what somebody else put there and I thought it was interesting. At which point I say, yes, I find it interesting that you would post something out there without finding out whether it's true or not, and then you don't apologize when you're pulled up on it. That's interesting. Yeah. As Christians, we need to be people of truth. And we also need to educate ourselves, because the biggest issue here is not the Olympics, it's not boxing, it's not even gender issues. The biggest issue here is that we as Christians have behaved so badly. We've come across with a knee-jerk reaction that made us look ignorant, contradictory, and mean. And we need to do better. Now, I've been talking a lot. I've gone all over the country speaking on gender issues to many, many, many different groups of people. And to be honest, I'm fed up of talking about it. I'd much rather move on and talk about other stuff. But nevertheless, this culture clash taking place right now. And at EAI, we are determined to keep helping believers to be Christ-like, consistent, coherent, and uncompromisingly biblical, even when we're talking about difficult subjects such as sexuality and gender. So let's be truthful, let's be informed, but let's stop and think before we just start putting stuff that isn't true out on social media, before we start threatening violence and offering to beat people up and calling other people repulsive and mocking people and everything else. We need a knee reaction when we get down on our knees, rather than our initial knee-jerk reaction. And I think we can learn to do that as the Christian church. Sometimes I feel like despairing whenever we don't come across as we really should do as children of the living God. But I believe we can do better, and we will do better, because it might be Friday, but Sunday's coming.